They came there every Friday. Women of different ages, modestly dressed with downcast eyes and frozen expressions. They called it a prayer group, just a few neighborhood ladies gathering at old Miss Elsie's house to read scripture and sing psalms. What could be more innocent? But one neighbor, Mrs. Grayson, couldn't shake the strange feeling. Every time the women entered the house, the curtains were tightly drawn, and strange sounds floated out, sometimes singing, sometimes moaning. She set up a surveillance camera, just to make sure everything was all right. But what the camera captured on the third evening didn't just disturb her, it shattered everything she believed in. They were standing in a circle. In the center, a young woman with a blindfold. They were holding hands, reciting words that existed in no Bible. And then Miss Elsie pulled out a knife. The house on Hollow Pine Street didn't look unusual. If anything, it was comforting. Pale blue paint, an overgrown garden full of wild lavender, and a wooden swing on the porch that creaked gently in the wind. Sarah stood at the gate, fingers clutched around the invitation she'd found tucked in her mailbox 2 days ago. Friday prayer circle, all welcome, it read in neat cursive. After months of trying to adjust to life in this quiet neighborhood, the idea of community, of belonging, felt like something she couldn't afford to ignore. Inside the house was dim but warm. The scent of cinnamon tea mixed with something older, muskier, like aged books and candle wax. The living room had been cleared of most furniture, replaced by a wide circle of mismatched chairs. 7 women were already seated when Sarah stepped in, and each of them greeted her with a nod that was polite but subdued. No one stood. No one smiled with teeth. They simply observed, as if marking her arrival with quiet acknowledgement, like checking off a name from an unseen list. The woman who had invited her, Miss Elsie, was older, her silver hair pinned neatly beneath a dark shawl, her posture straight, her eyes unreadable. She welcomed Sarah in a low voice and motioned to an empty chair. No words of introduction followed, no casual chatter. The meeting had already begun, and Sarah was expected to fall into rhythm. A worn Bible lay open on a table in the center of the circle, though no one read from it. Instead, one of the women, a tall figure with sunken cheeks, began to recite verses, but not ones Sarah recognized. They sounded like scripture, but the cadence was different. The words were strange, poetic, yet dense, heavy with meaning she couldn't grasp. Still, the others nodded solemnly, murmuring phrases under their breath like an echo just slightly out of sync. Tea was passed around. The cup Sarah received was delicate porcelain, cracked slightly along the rim. The tea itself was bitter and thick, almost medicinal. No one seemed to mind. No one stirred sugar or asked for honey. They drank slowly, reverently, eyes fixed on the center of the circle. Sarah tried to match their expressions, to blend in, but a quiet anxiety stirred in her stomach. It wasn't fear exactly, more like dissonance, like walking into a room where the music was just a little off-key. Everything looked right, the floral curtains, the religious paintings, the crocheted doilies. But beneath that softness, something tugged at her, whispering that all of it was staged, that she had just stepped into something not quite as it seemed. As the session continued, the room grew quieter, as if sound itself had been absorbed by the thick walls. One by one, the women closed their eyes. Their breathing synchronized, and Sarah felt a subtle pressure in her chest as though the very air had changed. Her hands grew cold. The light from the single chandelier above dimmed, or maybe it was the dusk settling outside, she couldn't tell. Her mind felt foggy, not from fatigue, but from the stillness that had overtaken the space. When Elsie finally spoke, her voice was softer than ever, barely audible. She spoke of cleansing, of letting go, of shedding the layers that the world had put on them. Sarah recognized the phrasing. It was familiar from countless spiritual retreats, sermons, and self-help books. But here, in this room, it didn't feel like healing. It felt like preparation. The circle ended without fanfare. No one hugged, no one exchanged numbers. They simply rose in silence and filtered out into the night, each woman walking home with the same steady, emotionless grace. Sarah lingered behind, unsure whether to thank her host or slip away unnoticed. Elsie offered her a long look and placed a hand gently on her shoulder, a touch that lingered half a second too long. Outside, the air felt cooler. The night was thick with crickets, but Sarah could still hear the echo of the room in her ears. The recitation, the humming, the silence, between breaths. When she got home, her husband asked how it went. She smiled and said it was peaceful, but she didn't elaborate. She couldn't explain the chill beneath her skin or the weight in her chest. That night, long after everyone else had gone to bed, she sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the cup she had brought home from the gathering, a small souvenir, she told herself. A gift from Elsie. The crack along the rim was deeper now, almost splitting the ceramic. Inside, at the very bottom, something dark clung to the surface. She tried to wash it out, but it didn't move. In the days that followed, she found herself returning to that moment. The circle, the hum, the silence that had filled her ears like a tide. She told herself she was imagining things, that it was just a prayer group, just women looking for meaning. But somewhere deep in her chest, Sarah felt something shifting, something that had entered quietly, on tiptoe, the moment she stepped through that door, and had no intention of leaving. The next Friday came quicker than Sarah expected. All week she had felt herself drifting through her days, her thoughts looping back to that living room with the mismatched chairs and the strange rhythmic silence. She kept trying to convince herself it was just a peculiar form of worship, perhaps more intense than she was used to, but harmless. Still, the atmosphere had clung to her like damp fabric, something unseen, but felt in every breath. She found herself waking in the middle of the night, her dreams flooded with whispers she couldn't decipher. Her children seemed louder, the sun too bright, the television unbearable. Everything felt sharpened and far away at once. On the morning of this next gathering, she considered not going, but then the thought arrived as if from outside herself. If she didn't go, would they notice? Would they come to her? That notion felt irrational, even paranoid, but it kept her from calling Elsie to cancel. By the time the evening shadows began to stretch across the street, she was already brushing her hair and choosing the same cardigan she wore the week before, as if consistency would keep her safe. She arrived just after sunset. The front door was already open. This time she didn't need to knock. She stepped inside and immediately noticed that the air felt heavier than before. It was warmer too. The same 7 women were there, seated in the same places, though now, their expressions were less blank and more focused, like they were waiting for something, or someone. Sarah took her place silently, avoiding eye contact, her hands tucked beneath her thighs to keep them from trembling. Tonight, there was no Bible on the table. Instead, there was a bowl filled with water, darkened by something thick and herbal. A single candle flickered beside it, its flame long and strangely still. Elsie began to speak almost immediately, but this time her words were not poetic or abstract. They were commands, sharp and deliberate. The group responded in low, unified murmurs. Sarah couldn't understand the language. It wasn't Latin. It wasn't anything she could place. But it stirred something in her. Something primal. About halfway through the gathering, the front door creaked. A new sound, unexpected. Every head turned in eerie unison as the figure stepped through the doorway. It was a girl, barely in her 20s, with long hair tied back and a nervous energy in her every step. She looked familiar, but Sarah couldn't place her. The girl avoided everyone's gaze and sat in the only remaining chair, directly across from Sarah. The ritual resumed, but Sarah's eyes kept drifting to the newcomer. She seemed anxious, eyes darting between faces. At one point, she looked directly at Sarah. It wasn't a glance, it was a signal. Quick, urgent, unmistakable, a warning. After the ceremony ended, the women dispersed as they had before, filing out into the street with quiet precision. Sarah lingered again, unsure what she was waiting for. As she stepped onto the porch, the night air wrapped around her, like a second skin. The street was empty except for the girl. She stood under a flickering street lamp, her posture stiff. Sarah walked past her without speaking, but the girl followed. A block away from the house, the girl caught up and fell into, step beside her. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't smile. Her voice was almost a whisper, but it struck Sarah like thunder. She said only a few words, soft, urgent, unmistakably serious. She said they had chosen her, that she should stop coming, that not everyone left once they'd been welcomed, that the smiles they wore were not real. Then the girl vanished into the darkness, slipping between houses before Sarah could respond. Her warning echoed in Sarah's ears all the way home. That night, Sarah didn't sleep. She sat in the hallway, outside her children's rooms, listening to the silence in her own house, wondering if she had already crossed a threshold that couldn't be uncrossed. She tried to dismiss the girl's words the next morning, chalking them up to a miscommunication or fear-mongering, but deep down she knew better. The girl's eyes had held the same look she'd seen in herself all week, the look of someone who had seen something she couldn't explain, the look of someone who had realized too late that what she had entered wasn't a community, but a cage. Days passed. Sarah didn't speak of the warning to anyone, not even her husband. It felt too fragile, too unbelievable to share. But she couldn't shake the feeling that the others knew something had been said. At the grocery store, she noticed two of the women from the group in another aisle. They didn't wave or smile. They simply stared, their faces expressionless, until she turned away. When she looked back, they were gone. On the third night after the last meeting, Sarah found something on her porch. A folded note tucked under a small hand-carved wooden cross. The note bore no name, just 4 words, written in tight, slanted handwriting. "You are being prepared." Her hands trembled as she read it. Not from fear, at least not the kind that made you run, but from the realization that the girl had been right. Something was unfolding. Slowly, deliberately, and she was at the center of it, whether she wanted to be or not. By the time the third Friday approached, Sarah was no longer just a guest. She was an object of attention. She could feel it in the way the others looked at her, no longer with quiet indifference, but with something sharper, more expectant. Their eyes lingered just a bit too long. Their movement slowed when she entered the room, as if taking measure of her presence. And though no one had said a word beyond the ritual chants, she felt her place in the group had shifted. She wasn't observing anymore. She was being observed. The note on her porch still sat in her drawer, unread since the day she found it. But the words had branded themselves into her thoughts. You are being prepared. Prepared for what, she didn't know. And the lack of clarity only fed the quiet dread that had taken up residence in her chest. Her mind spun constantly. Was it spiritual? Was it symbolic? Or was it something darker? Her husband had started to notice the change. She didn't speak much anymore, and when she did, her words felt mechanical, as if she were saving her real voice for somewhere else. He didn't push her. He simply watched, listened, and finally, on the evening before the next meeting, asked the question she hadn't known she was waiting to hear. He offered a solution, not an accusation, not a command, just a precaution. A small, hidden camera, embedded in the lining of her handbag. Something she could carry with her just in case. When she arrived at the house that evening, Sarah felt the weight of the camera like a secret heartbeat. Her palms were damp, her breaths shallow, but her expression remained calm. The front door was ajar, waiting for her. Inside, the room was arranged differently now. The chairs had been moved closer together. The candle in the center of the circle was no longer white. It was deep red, almost the color of dried blood. There was no Bible, no bowl. Instead, a small, wooden box sat at the center, sealed with a black ribbon. No one spoke. The air was still, as though the house itself was holding its breath. Elsie motioned for Sarah to sit. and the others shifted slightly, adjusting their posture. They didn't look at her this time. They looked past her, above her, as if something else had entered the room with her. The ceremony began. It was slower, tonight more deliberate. The chanting was softer, lower in tone. Each phrase was punctuated by a pause, a silence that seemed to stretch impossibly long, making the words feel heavier, more intimate. Sarah couldn't understand the language, but she could feel the rhythm of it crawling under her skin. She kept her eyes low, her face still, her thoughts focused on the tiny lens hidden in her bag beside her feet. Halfway through the ritual, Elsie reached into the wooden box. From it, she pulled a bundle wrapped in white cloth. She unwrapped it slowly, methodically, revealing a set of objects Sarah couldn't fully make out. Small stones etched with symbols, a curved piece of bone, and something that looked like a fragment of fabric stained dark at one end. Elsie held each object with reverence, showing them to the group one by one, and the women responded with a synchronized breath, a single sound shared across their lips like smoke. Then came the moment Sarah hadn't prepared for. Elsie turned to her. She extended a hand, palm open, inviting Sarah to rise. Sarah stood, legs stiff, and stepped into the center of the circle. Her heart pounded loud enough she was sure the others could hear it. The candle's flame flickered violently, casting jagged shadows across the walls. The red light made their faces seem hollow, carved from wax. Still, no one spoke a word. Elsie reached into the box again and brought out a small jar. Its contents shimmered, a thick, dark liquid that glinted like oil. With 2 fingers, she dabbed the substance onto Sarah's forehead, her chest, the backs of her hands. The smell hit Sarah like rotting flowers, metallic and cloying. Her thoughts darted to the camera. It was watching this. It was recording. She wasn't alone. The chanting resumed, louder now, faster. The women swayed. Their eyes remained closed, but their mouths worked feverishly, speaking the same words again and again like an incantation building towards something inevitable. Sarah stood frozen in the center, the sticky marks on her skin burning slightly as if reacting to her breath. Then the room shifted. It wasn't a movement of furniture or people. It was something more visceral, a distortion in perception. The air grew thick, heavy with something unnameable. Sarah felt a pressure in her ears like descending underwater. Time stretched. The candle's flame doubled, then split, as though flickering in 2 separate directions. Elsie's voice changed. It deepened, vibrating against the floor, like it was being spoken from beneath the house. When it ended all at once. The chant stopped mid-word. The flame extinguished in a burst of smoke. The silence was immediate and absolute. Sarah remained standing, breathless, until Elsie touched her shoulder and whispered something into her ear. Something Sarah didn't understand, but felt like a command. She returned to her seat in silence. The others followed soon after, and, within minutes, the circle was broken. The gathering was over. Outside, the night was colder than she remembered. She walked home without speaking, her fingers curled tightly around her handbag like it was the only anchor she had left. At home, her husband waited. He didn't ask anything. He simply took the bag and went into his office. Hours later, he came out pale and quiet, laptop in hand. He showed her the footage. Grainy, low resolution, but clear enough. The chants, the circle, the jar, the symbols. Her in the center, eyes wide, body still, and Elsie, staring directly into the lens. Not accidentally, not briefly, but as if she had known exactly where it was. As if she had placed her hand on Sarah's shoulder not to bless her, but to speak directly to the camera. He paused the video. Her face filled the screen. The candle's red glow lit the edges of her expression, and for a split second she didn't recognize herself. Something in her eyes had changed, something she didn't remember feeling. The next gathering was not like the others. From the moment Sarah received the envelope, hand-delivered, unsigned, sealed with red wax, she knew something had changed. The paper inside was thick and textured, the writing dense and formal. There was no mention of a prayer circle this time, just a single phrase written across the center. The night of shedding. No date, no time, no place, just that phrase. And yet she understood. She knew when, she knew where. It wasn't a choice anymore. The day moved strangely, every hour stretched thin like a thread pulled too tight. Colors seemed off, sounds muffled. Even the sky had an odd stillness, as if the world itself were waiting. She moved through her routines, on autopilot, preparing dinner for the children, folding laundry, pretending to listen when her husband spoke. But beneath it all, there was a slow burning hum inside her, a sense of inevitability curling around her ribs. She didn't fight it. She didn't try to leave town or make excuses. Whatever was happening, she was already too deep to escape it cleanly. As night fell, she dressed in silence, not in her usual clothes, but in the long linen dress that had been left folded at her door the previous morning. Another sign, another unspoken instruction. It was pale gray, loose and simple. No shoes, no jewelry. She tied her hair back and stepped into the night without a word, her body moving as if guided by something outside of herself. The house looked different in the dark, not ominous, reverent. Candles burned in every window. The front door stood, open once more, but no one waited inside the entryway. The house was utterly silent. As Sarah stepped through, the sound of her bare feet against the wooden floor echoed unnaturally, each step falling like a bell toll. Down the hallway, the door to the living room was shut. A single white thread had been tied across the handle, in a delicate loop. She paused for a moment, not breathing, before slipping the thread loose and entering. Inside, the women stood in a circle, already formed, already waiting. They were all dressed the same, bare feet, pale garments, hair pulled back. Their faces were painted with faint, dark smudges beneath the eyes, like charcoal or ash. The air was thick with the scent of herbs, wax, and something sharp beneath it, like metal. In the center of the room, the red candle had been replaced by a wide copper basin filled with dark liquid. Beside it sat a shallow dish holding a curved knife with a bone handle. No one spoke. Sarah felt her heartbeat slow as she took her place in the circle. Elsie stepped forward. Her hair was unbound for the first time, falling in waves around her shoulders, making her look both older and more powerful. She carried a long cord wrapped in black cloth and moved with the gravity of someone performing a rite that had been done countless times before. She approached Sarah and raised the cloth, revealing the cord, braided from hair. It looked human. It smelled faintly of lavender. Elsie placed it around Sarah's neck, not tightly, but with ceremony. Then she whispered something in the old language, words that Sarah didn't understand but that made her stomach twist. The women began to hum, low and vibrating. The lights dimmed, not from electricity, but as if the room itself decided to go darker. Shadows deepened. The basin in the center shimmered. Elsie led Sarah to the center. The copper basin was warm to the touch. Sarah knelt before it, not by command, but instinctively. She stared into the surface and saw her reflection, distorted, flickering. Behind her, the women swayed in unison, eyes closed, their hum intensifying, until it was no longer sound but sensation, a pressure pressing in from all directions. Elsie knelt beside her and dipped her fingers into the dark liquid, raising it to Sarah's forehead, her chest, then each shoulder. With each touch, the heat of the liquid pulsed into her skin. Then came the knife. Elsie held it high, letting the firelight dance across the blade. She whispered more words, this time slower, heavier. She cut a strand of Sarah's hair and let it fall into the basin. Another cut followed, and another. With each strand, the humming grew. The women began to chant louder now, their voices overlapping in layers of sound that felt ancient and unbearable. Elsie held out Sarah's hand and drew the blade lightly across her palm. The sting was immediate but clean. A single drop of blood fell into the basin. The surface rippled once, then calmed. The women's voices reached a fever pitch, vibrating the walls themselves. The candle flames grew taller, swaying violently. Then, all at once, The chanting ceased. Stillness. Elsie looked into Sarah's eyes. Her own eyes seemed changed, deeper, darker, filled with something unnameable. She touched Sarah's face, her expression unreadable. Then slowly, she leaned forward and whispered something that sounded like a benediction, or a sentence. Sarah was led back to her place in the circle. Her hands were trembling now, not from fear but from exhaustion, from the weight of what had been taken, what had been marked. The others didn't look at her. They faced forward, their eyes fixed on the space where the basin stood. One by one, they extinguished the candles. The room was plunged into darkness. No one moved. Time stretched. Then a door creaked open in the hallway, a door Sarah hadn't seen before. Pale light spilled from it, and one by one the women turned and walked toward it, disappearing into the glow. When Sarah's turn came, she hesitated only briefly before stepping forward. Her body ached. Her mind swam. But her feet moved on, their own. What lay beyond that door she could never describe later, not in words that made sense. It was a room. It was a void. It was memory and forgetting at once. But something happened there. Something final. When she emerged, the house was empty. The candlelight was gone. The basin was gone, the women were gone, and outside the world felt somehow quieter. But not safe. Never safe again. The days that followed the ritual moved like smoke, formless, slow, and strangely sweet. Sarah no longer questioned whether she belonged. Something inside her had been altered, and though her routines remained intact, waking early, feeding the children, folding laundry, moving through polite conversations with neighbors, there was a detachment in her gestures, as though someone else had taken her place and was wearing her life like a garment. The world around her looked the same, but it no longer held meaning. The trees, the houses, even the sky felt hollow. She moved within it like an observer, not a participant. At night, she dreamed of red candles and flickering shadows. She heard the hum of voices in her sleep, layered like echoes in a cave, speaking in that impossible language that twisted the edges of her memory. Every morning she awoke with the taste of metal on her tongue and the impression that something had watched her sleep. Her husband noticed the changes, her silences, the way she stared too long at nothing, the way she flinched when touched. But he said nothing. He was becoming afraid of her, and part of her understood why. The girl returned on the 5th day. Sarah saw her through the window, standing on the far side of the street beneath a broken street lamp. She hadn't seen her since the night of the warning, the one who had said they had chosen her. But now she was here again, watching. Her posture was rigid, her hands buried deep in the pockets of a long coat. There was a desperation in her stance, like someone at the edge of a cliff, unsure whether to jump or scream. Sarah didn't go to her. She didn't even move. She just stared until the girl turned and walked away. That evening, Sarah followed instinct, not reason. She returned to the house on Hollow Pine without invitation. The door was locked this time, but a key had been left under the doormat, as if her return had been expected. Inside, the house was unchanged, dim, quiet, waiting. She moved through the halls as though retracing the steps of a dream. The living room stood empty, the chairs gone, the copper basin, the candle, the symbols all removed. Only the faint scent of burnt wax and herbs remained, clinging to the walls like memory. But something called her deeper. She found the stairs behind a narrow door near the kitchen, steep, creaking with every step, leading down into darkness. The air grew colder as she descended, the smell more pungent like damp earth and rust. At the bottom was a basement, long and low-ceilinged, lit only by a single naked bulb swaying from the center of the room. And in that dim light, she saw her. The girl. She was seated against the far wall, her knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped tightly around them. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with recognition and something more fragile. Hope. But Sarah didn't move toward her. She stood at the base of the stairs, her feet frozen to the concrete, her breath shallow. The girl began to speak, and her voice cracked with urgency. She told her everything. How she had come to the group looking for meaning. How she had trusted Elsie. How the ceremonies had started innocent, then shifted. How people who tried to leave were erased, not with violence but with silence. With forgetting. She told Sarah she had seen what they did when no one was watching. She had hidden in the crawl space during one of the rituals, seen what lay behind the chanting and candles. She spoke of masks, not literal ones, but the way the women changed when they thought no one was looking. The flicker of cruelty in their eyes, the way they treated newcomers not as sisters, but vessels. And she said one thing that chilled Sarah, to her core, that once the group chose someone, they didn't let go. Not ever. They didn't need to. Because the chosen didn't want to leave. That was the point. The ritual wasn't about control. It was about surrender. Sarah stood motionless, her mind spinning. Part of her wanted to run, to grab the girl and flee into the night. But another part, the deeper, quieter part, felt nothing but stillness. No fear, no urgency, only observation. The girl spoke on, her words growing more frantic, more desperate. She begged Sarah to believe her, to remember who she was before, to resist, and still Sarah didn't move. When Elsie appeared behind her, it didn't startle her. It felt inevitable. She stepped aside as the older woman passed, her presence commanding, her movements calm. Elsie didn't speak. She simply walked to the girl, knelt beside her, and placed a hand gently on her head. The girl sobbed, collapsed inward, then went silent. Elsie rose, turned, and walked back toward the stairs. Sarah followed. As they climbed, Sarah could hear nothing behind them. No footsteps, no breath, no voice. Only the soft creak of the stairs beneath their feet and the hum of electricity from the dim overhead light. Back in the house, everything had returned to stillness. Elsie disappeared down a hallway and Sarah was left standing in the foyer, her reflection staring back at her from a darkened mirror on the wall. She didn't recognize it. The face looking back wore her skin, but the eyes were older. They held something sharp, something buried. And for the first time, Sarah realized she had not simply been welcomed into the group, she had been rewritten by it. Her thoughts weren't her own anymore. They echoed with borrowed cadence. Her memories were shifting, softening at the edges. The woman she had been. The one who baked cookies, who laughed at cartoons with her kids, who dreamed of teaching again, was fading. And something else had taken her place. Something colder. Something watching. That night, when she returned home, her children ran to her. She kissed them, tucked them in, smiled in all the right places. Her husband asked how her walk had been. She said it was nice. Her voice was even, calm, perfectly human. But deep inside her, in the quiet places no one could see, she felt it move, the mask settling over her face, the old life slipping further away. And she let it. The morning sunlight poured through the kitchen window, golden and indifferent, casting long bars of light across the tiled floor. Sarah stood in the same spot she always did, hands wrapped around a coffee mug, eyes scanning the yard beyond the glass. But something in her gaze had changed. She didn't blink as much. Her face was still unnaturally so, as if her muscles had learned to rest in an unfamiliar shape. Her husband watched her from the hallway, careful not to make a sound. He had stopped asking questions. Whatever lived. Behind her silence was not something he could reach. But he had seen enough. He had reviewed the footage a dozen times. He had watched her, wide-eyed and motionless, in the center of a circle of women chanting in a language that seemed to slip around the edges of meaning. He had seen the blade, the smoke, the blood. He had seen the moment she looked into the camera, as if she knew it was there, as if she had always known. Now he sat in his office with the final edited version of the footage queued and ready, compressed into a 10-minute video file. He didn't add voiceover. He didn't cut away. He didn't sensationalize. He simply let the camera speak. Then, without telling her, he uploaded it to a private server. and sent it to a journalist he trusted, someone who owed him a favor from years ago, someone who wouldn't dismiss it as delusion. Within the hour, the journalist replied. Within 3, the footage was live. The video spread faster than he expected. View counts exploded, comments poured in, debates erupted. Real or hoax, cult or performance art, mental illness or mass manipulation. But no one could deny the images. No one could ignore the atmosphere, the way the women moved in unison, the way Sarah looked at the camera like it was a mirror. By evening, local police were knocking on their door. Sarah greeted them with calm politeness. Her eyes did not waver as she listened to their questions. She invited them in, offered them tea, answered with just enough clarity to seem cooperative, but never enough to incriminate. When they asked about the gatherings, she explained them as spiritual support meetings, nothing formal, nothing structured, just prayer and conversation. When they mentioned Elsie, she tilted her head and said she didn't know anyone by that name. But they had seen the video. They had names, faces, timestamps. A search warrant followed the next day. The house on Hollow, Pine Street, was sealed and swept. Forensics teams moved through each room, photographing, collecting, peeling back layers of normalcy to uncover what had lived beneath. They found melted candles, scraps of parchment, remnants of strange symbols carved into floorboards and walls. In the basement, they found a discarded robe and a locked trunk filled with ritual items, some modern, some ancient, some defying classification. They found photographs of women, dozens of them, pinned to a corkboard, with dates and markings. Beside each name, some were crossed out. But Elsie was gone. No neighbors had seen her leave. Her bank accounts were untouched. Her phone, left behind in a drawer, offered no clues. It was as if she had never existed. The girl in the basement was found 2 days later, wandering alone outside a gas station miles away, barefoot and dazed. She had no memory of how she got there. Her name came back slowly, her story in fragments. But she remembered Sarah, and she remembered the ceremony. By the end of the week, the news cycle was saturated. The Hollow Pine Cult, they called it. Analysts speculated, experts pontificated, former neighbors clutched their pearls on morning shows, describing how nothing had ever seemed strange, how polite the women had always been. But beneath the public fascination was a deeper unease. There had been no bodies, no official victims, just rituals, symbols, and something intangible, a sense that something had been disturbed, something older than the neighborhood, older than the women themselves. Sarah said nothing. Not to the police, not to the press, not even to her husband. She moved through the days with the same eerie serenity, speaking softly to the children, watering the plants, folding the laundry, as if nothing had changed. But each night she sat awake at the kitchen table long after the house had gone still, staring out the window into the dark. And then one night, she was gone. Her husband woke to find her side of the bed empty, her shoes by the door, her phone on the nightstand. The front door slightly ajar, a faint scent lingered in the hallway, herbs and wax and smoke. There was no note, no sign of struggle. Just the quiet departure of someone who had not really been there for a long time. Weeks passed. The video remained online, now archived in forums, dissected by theorists, turned into podcasts and documentaries. But new stories had taken its place. New scandals, new outrages, new mysteries to obsess over. The world moved on.